I started the recording.
All right, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Orlando Ramos. I've had the honor and pleasure of being the chair for doctoral candidate Don Matthews. Also want to thank Don for your service to our country. He's also Lieutenant Colonel Mathis, and we appreciate and recognize your service to our great country. So obviously Don is on. Dr. Hill?
Yes, sir.
She's present. Dr. Bottomley?
Dr. Bottomley is present.
Excellent. So we have our entire committee. I want to thank Dr. Hill for joining us last minute, and I really hope that Dr. Price is doing well. And I want to thank the entire committee for their time and commitment and dedication related to the development of the study. And congratulations to our doctoral candidate on reaching this milestone in his academic journey. And again, thank you for your service to our country. So the agenda, we're going to begin with the formal presentation by Don Mathis, which will be about 30 minutes long.
Yes.
After that concludes, we'll go over the defense portion of the study, and you'll have to answer questions from your entire committee. After that's completed, you'll stop the recording. You'll be asked to step away from the room while the committee deliberates on the results, and the outcome will be approved with changes, or not approved. You'll be invited back to discuss the results, and then we'll have some concluding remarks, and the entire defense should take roughly an hour. Don, do you have any questions before you begin?
No, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Ramos.
Okay, and the last thing I'm going to go over is a couple of administrative tips, and I'll reiterate these at the end. Upon your completion, I'm going to ask that you upload the recording and submit it to Teams 365. The committee will complete their oral defense rubric in TK20. And during the presentation, I see Dr. Bottomley and Hill have already muted their devices. I'll be doing the same. And Don, if you don't have any questions, the floor is yours. The time is now 5:25 Eastern Standard Time.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let me bring up the presentation. Can everyone see that all right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me. My name is Don Mathis. The title of my dissertation was Overcoming the Virtual Distance, a Qualitative Appreciative Inquiry. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Phoenix, in the University of Phoenix doctoral program. I want to give a special thanks and reiterate what Dr. Ramos had said. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you. I wish all the best to Dr. Prius. I hope she's doing all right. I want to say thank you to Dr. Hill for joining us and Dr. Bottomley for pushing me to do the right thing with my methodology. And I've got to give a quick shout out, because I've been to in and out of this program for 11 years, to Robert Gentile, who's been patient with me as I've gone in and out of this program and tried to persevere. So here's a quick table of contents for the agenda. We're going to cover it's the introduction, literature review, the design and method, the results. When we get to discussion, we'll talk about the limitations of the study, the recommendations for leaders and practitioners, and then we'll discuss ideas for future research. So first of all, who am I? Well, as Dr. Ramos said, I am a Marine officer and an FBI employee. Sometimes I feel like I'm a Marine officer moonlighting as a FBI employee, but that's my full-time job. I have been, as I said, in and out of this program for over a decade, and have a completely different view, I think, than I would have had, a different lens to look through than I would have had about 10 years ago when I started. So I've added on, at that time I had about 13 years of Department of Defense service, and I've added on since then another 10 years of Department of Justice service. So my lens right now is a lot different. I've been a leader, follower, and a practitioner. I think scholar is embedded in all of those. It's important to mentor folks and to be a mentee as well. So that's a little bit about myself. So let's discuss the problem. So the problem is that prior to building on organizational practices to improve transformational changes, a qualitative approach needs to be taken and exercised in order to determine which is being practiced organizationally, management or leadership. Now, the problem interweaves relationships, human interaction, discusses, it challenges leadership styles using technology, and really task-based management or just management. Kind of interweaves all of those issues. I kind of look at, you'll hear me use the words information communication technology or advanced information communication technology. I've used those words in my dissertation just to be succinct throughout this oral defense. I will probably just use information technology. It's just, I don't want to get tongue-tied. It's just a little easier. But the problem really, you see the cartoon on the bottom, the problem really revolves around what I kind of equate to, what I compare to the idea or concept of getting a car when you're young. You get a car, you know how to drive, you know the concept of driving, but it's only through experience that you know what this car can transport, you know how to get better gas mileage, you know what maintenance needs to be done with it. So you kind of figure that out and you learn through experiencing it. And even though there's manuals and things out there that you can look at, you talk to your friends, you talk to different people, it's really your experience with the car that makes you a better driver or learn how to use it. And I think that's kind of the same thing. I equate that it's the same thing with technology. You're really, in organizations, you're really looking at technology and how to implement it and how it relates to organizational change and how leaders use it to lead people or continue to be task-based managers. So the purpose of this study was to understand if cyberspace or virtual interaction provides the venue for human interaction on an emotional level that is necessary for e-leadership to be practiced. So what this appreciative inquiry was to explore was the information communication technology, how it's used, and how it applies to management and leadership. Through that discovery, we determine what the answer to the problem is. So what is this contributing to? Well, as I had done my literature review, I had found that there was a large delta and a lack of knowledge on virtualized organizations. There have been a lot of studies regarding large IT projects, how to implement those large IT projects, how to implement IT, but there wasn't a lot out there with regard to the human factors involved with leadership or management and the results of those implementations and how they impacted them. So I felt that this led me to the qualitative approach, because when we're talking about human emotions and people interacting, it really involves a face-to-face interaction and trying to extract those human emotions and determine what the best course of action is to move ahead. When I go back to leadership and management, leadership itself is about casting a vision, about being able to impart knowledge on folks. It's about being able to inspire folks. Whereas management is more of a task-based approach, right? I need this done in a certain amount of time, and we need this outcome. It's not necessarily about, which doesn't lead to organizational change. So that's the purpose of this. That was the purpose of this appreciative inquiry, and that's what I was contributing to. I was trying to contribute to that delta of knowledge. E-leadership in theory is fairly new, and there weren't a lot of studies that really looked at the human factors involved when implementing technology in organizations. So let's talk real quick about the literature review. Now, the literature review, I really focused on these particular areas. Now, I think the prominent theories or the competing theories in here were between Longhurst, Zalesnik, and Yates and Avolio and Kahi. Now, Avolio had pioneered e-leadership the late 90s and really evolved it even further with Kahi and said that together their theory is that e-leadership is leading people through technology. It's using that, it's facilitated through technology. But Longhurst came along and said, you don't have human interactions. You can't have human interactions in cyberspace over technology. And therefore, you can't develop those intimate relationships that are required to transcend people from management to e-leadership. And then, of course, early on, Zalesnik, he's talking about managing people and how it affects organizational change. Now, what Zalesnik brought up was that, if you're managing people, again, you're not affecting organizational change. If you're leading people, that will lead to organizational change. Yates, now, the implementation of technology is really on the user. And we've said this many times in software development. I've heard this many times throughout my career that, unless you look through the lens of the user, you are not going to implement this technology properly, or you're not going to develop this software properly. So what Yates is talking about is about looking through the lens of the user and what their needs are when you develop or implement technology in an organization. Dafton and Langle and DeLuca and Velicek, they talk about synchronous and asynchronous use of technology in organizations and people's propensity to use it based on the information that they want to transfer between people. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. That'll come up. There's an honorable mention on this list that isn't here for Lewin. This goes back to 1947. Lewin talks about needing a catastrophic event in order to purge organizational behavior. So Lewin's talking about the fact that organizations have become stagnant, and there needs to be some kind of catalyst for change, some kind of major event or something like that. Keep that in mind, because we'll touch on that a little bit later. But I know this was pretty expansive. There were a lot of theories that I touched on, but when I got into the appreciative inquiry, I really wasn't sure what I was going to run into, so I thought it was important to have these left and right lateral limits, although broad. I thought I may touch on all of those, from organizational change to e-leadership to management, and then structural changes. So let's talk real quick about the design. So appreciative inquiry was pioneered by Cooper Ryder in 1986, and appreciative inquiry is a method that is a very hands-on method in looking at organizations. Traditional problem-solving methods, and I've been in the government for 23 years now, and we've always looked at things from well, that's broken. How do we fix it? It's a negative approach. It's a negative approach to problem solving. I looked at, when I discovered appreciative inquiry, I thought, well, this is a very positive. It's positive constructivism. And why is it positive constructivism? Because you're not looking at what's wrong with an organization. You're looking at what's right. or a system. You're looking at where does this organization want to go? What is working? What are these processes that we have? What is the technology that's implemented that people are using, and how are they using it? That establishes the base for where you want to go in the future. So the dream, design, destiny, and discovery, the 4 Ds that are involved in appreciative inquiry, I kind of went through this as I went through the appreciative inquiry design. Now, in my 23 years of being in the federal government, I kind of grew tired of just looking at this from a negative aspect. So I thought that appreciative inquiry, especially with what was going on with CD19, I thought this was a very positive approach that I thought people would want to talk to me about how they were feeling about the organization, what they were thinking about the implementation of technology. I thought it was a very positive approach, and that seemed to pay dividends when I did the semi-structured interviews later on. So there's 2 major instruments. My research questions, R1, R2, and R3, which are up there. I developed an 11-question instrument. That was my my first instrument. And I asked questions like, can you describe your role within the agency? Do you understand the definition of e-leadership? What challenge have you had with e-leadership? So I developed the instrument, and then I used a semi-structured interview format, which seemed to be, I like the semi-structured interview format because it didn't stick us to these 11 questions and the answers. To those 11 questions, I was able to have a very good conversation that lasted anywhere between 35 and 55 minutes. Actually, I think one lasted an hour, right? And it gave me a lot of information. So sometimes I was able to ask the questions, and then I would get to an answer through the conversation that we had. So as I mentioned there, I'm the other part, the second instrument. It's through my lens that the entire study is conducted, and the other instruments. So I'm applying all of my own knowledge, all of my own experience to this study. The informed consent form was sent to the potential folks, potential participants ahead of time. They returned it, and if there were any problems or anything like that, we would cover that before the interview, but I didn't run into any problems. I took a total of 18 people. I had interviewed 20. One of them I actually threw out, and the other one, because of the quality of the interview, it just wasn't of any quality. But the 18 I had reached data saturation. I felt through the study, so that's why there were 18 people. We'll get to the next. We'll talk about the demographics. So as I mentioned, we conducted the interviews. At the onset of the interview, I established rapport, and I asked a few questions with regard to what their position and title was within the organization. Most of these, if you're not familiar with the general schedule, most of these GS 13 through 15 are at about the middle management level within the organization. They may not be managers, but I demonstrate here whether or not they're supervisory or non-supervisory. The military background, the non-military background, I really didn't make that much difference in the study. I really wasn't studying that particular thing, but I thought that was an interesting thing to ask as I look at this information, may look at this information again down the road. But what I did was, after the interviews, I used member checking, and I actually transcribed the interview shortly after, and then I would send them to the member along with any field notes I had taken. and then they gave me feedback. All of the participants, I think there were none that actually had any comments or anything like that to make insofar as making changes to the product. So in the data analysis, I used NVivo to do queries of common words and common themes throughout all of the transcripts. And I thought that was pretty good to gather themes, to start theming and coding. I wasn't really comfortable with it at first, but as I had done probably about 50 queries, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to do my own data analysis without using the software. NVivo is a commercial off-the-shelf product, but I really still wasn't comfortable. Now, it did give some great visual representation of some of the data, but I still wasn't comfortable with the results. So that led me to doing analytic coding through Excel. So what I had done is I had taken the phrases, I read every single one of the transcripts, which I had transcribed myself, and I had a copy of R1, R2, and R3 sitting there, and I went through and extracted each one of the phrases that I deemed pertinent to each one of those. Those were put into a separate spreadsheet, a separate tab in a spreadsheet, and then I went across all of them and then coded them, green for a common theme, yellow secondary, and red third, and then I had recommendations with significant ideas, which actually turned into a fourth theme in the study. What I liked about this was that it gave me a high familiarity with the data. I really knew the data well, and I thought that was really important as I was writing my findings. I was able to go back and look at some of this, look at some of the comments that were made, reflect on those, and have better results, I think. So what were the themes?
Did we lose him?
I think we did.
It looks like he dropped off. I will send him a message to try to get him signed back on.
Okay.
Okay, are we back?
Yes.
I can hear you.
The only way I noticed is the camera went off, so I don't know at what point I might have fallen out.
You just said the word themes, and then everything went blank from there. So if you could pick up with that slide and begin on themes again.
Okay, apparently it's still recording. It says it's still recording, so I will just share the screen and continue on.
Perfect.
Sorry about that. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes, I got you.
can.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Okay, so these were the major themes that emerged. The theme one was really pertinent to R3, which really was the crux of my research, was to try to determine whether or not people were being e-led, or if they were being managed using information communication technology, or IT. Also, what emerged was that synchronous technologies tended to be the preferred method for folks to develop the human relationships necessary for e-leadership to take place in a virtual environment. The third one was that supervisors chose a wide range of communication of methods of IT to communicate with employees, meaning that if they were going to if they were going to disseminate information, they would use asynchronous type of technologies, and then they would use others for having synchronous type of technologies when they were going to have meetings and things like that. Now, theme 4, which was very important. This one came about with trust. Now, this came up in a lot of the interviews. We talked about how a leadership relationship is established outside of a managerial relationship, and trust was always the theme that came up. And this goes back to leadership theory, e-leadership theory. Trust is always a factor. It's a human factor, but trust is a little slower and a little harder to establish in a virtual environment. It's much more difficult to have water cooler conversations. You have to be more deliberate when you do that. Water cooler conversations are what the kind when you're in your business or at home or at school, and you walk down the hallway and you run into somebody, or you run into your family member, and you just say, hey, what's happening? What's going on? And you have a conversation that could lead to different areas. You don't have that in a virtual environment. What you have is, but the better practitioners are doing is, the leadership was doing, was they were having those deliberately. And that comes up when I discuss the findings, right? So I mentioned Lewin in the very beginning as one of the honorable mentions in the theories that I had uncovered during my literature review. And Lewin had discussed, something drastic must happen for a system to purge old patterns of behavior. And that is exactly what COVID-19 has done. It has, we think that we're in the 4th industrial revolution right now, and we think that, in the past it's been CIOs, execs, leaders, managers, things that steer an organization and deliver it down the path of change. Well, this is the first time where an epidemic, something drastic has happened, and it's forced organizations to change. CIOs aren't leading change. COVID-19 is leading change right now. So that was one of the findings that came out of this. I mentioned this asynchronous technology is good for passing information, but it seemed to be a poor conduit for practicing e-leadership. Availability. Now, this led to one of my transformational suggestions in the organization, but deliberate availability is linked to establishing trust. I think that is very important. Those that felt that they could be reached around the clock or made themselves available around the clock and didn't have a problem with that seem to have better relationships with each other or with their management. That seemed to be pretty obvious. The contractor, insofar as contractors, what the interesting thing was about that in federal government. This came out of one particular interview, but the individual discussed the fact that, I am not located in close proximity, and I don't have a personal relationship with contractors, and therefore it's easier for me to have a managerial relationship and make business decisions with those folks if they're underperforming. I thought that was kind of interesting. So lastly, in discussion, we talk about the limitations. Some of the limitations now, appreciative inquiry is not about looking at cause and effect necessarily. That I think is a it's just a limitation of appreciative inquiry. We're looking at an organization and where it is now, where it wants to go, and how we get there, rather than looking at something broken. So something broken and leading to some consequence. Another limitation that I felt was in the study was that it didn't take an individual's propensity to adjust to technology. It didn't take that into account as a factor. I thought that was probably, I think that if I was able to measure that, it may give me a better measure of how to implement technology, or the timeliness of implementing technology for certain people when they have to do a rapid adjustment, as has happened recently. Since it was an appreciative inquiry and a qualitative study, it was a limited sample. I had a tremendous amount of data, but it was a limited sample from headquarters in the FBI. So it wasn't taking into account the 56 field offices that we have throughout the country, who seem to be surrounded by their own rules, regulations, and operate autonomously from headquarters. The other one is the lens of the instrument. As I mentioned earlier, as me being the instrument, I'm applying my own thoughts, ideas, principles, my experiences, all the knowledge I have, and to this particular problem. So that in appreciative inquiry being a transformative strategy, I think that my influence on the situation and looking at the data could have impacted the outcome to some extent. But the last limitation is the fishbowl effect, and the fishbowl effect is obviously, again, I think related to what I mentioned before with regard to the FBI and its unique mission. It is a fairly unique organization throughout government organizations, as some of the other organizations are in the intelligence community. And that fishbowl effect, although all of this does apply to other organizations, the unique mission makes it a little bit different. Talking about leaders and practitioners, and my recommendations to leaders and practitioners. The query and treatment, I think, of participants matters. I think in this case, given the timing of COVID-19, I went from having a more select group of people to choose from for the study to having a lot of people. And I think that choosing appreciative inquiry in this particular case, given all the stress that was involved with the situation, I think people were very willing to talk, very willing to discuss their experiences, and those experiences were very fresh. So I think that, looking at that, my suggestion is that we have to look at how we treat the participants, and given the situation that's surrounding them. There was a tremendous amount of data collected. I think I could have written, and I will probably be going back to some of the data that I have and taking a look at it, because I would like to, I've had interest from executive management and what I've written so far, and I think they're interested in how we could transform ourselves better. But given that fact, there was a tremendous amount of data in this collected, and each transcript was probably about 8 to 10 pages long, and it made it very challenging to go through all of those. So be wary I think being wary of the amount of data that you're going to collect and how you're going to tackle all that data in a timely fashion is important. The third thing is the assumption is that leaders are equipped to use technology to lead. And I think that that's a false assumption. Just because a person has grown up with a car or learned how to use a car, is trained to use a car, doesn't mean they're going to be a good driver. And that goes to the same token, as being a leader. Just because the person has grown, technology has grown around the person as they moved up in their organization, that doesn't mean that they know how to implement it properly. Again, I will mention the around-the-clock availability. I think that was a huge factor in a lot of people in establishing a trusting relationship and transcending management and moving into a leadership type of situation. So around-the-clock availability, again, is very important. I think ourselves as an organization, what I discovered is that we need to do a better job of promoting synchronous technology to e-lead. What you find in an organization like this is that we'll send out something from executive management that is trying to impart leadership, but it'll be in the form of an email rather than having a town hall or something like that may impart a vision or something like that. So I thought that the promotion of the technology and the training to use that technology in an organization is important. For future research, I think that I would probably look at a mixed methodology approach, looking at, as I mentioned before, the history or adaptation rate, and combine that with the study that I did, or carry on the study. I think that would be very fruitful. And the second thing is looking at how organizations are structured. Now everybody in the information age, in this information age, they're able to reach out to anybody to talk about anything. And I think that several conversations that I had during these interviews discussed the emerging of leaders in online working groups, and how by natural selection, certain people would emerge as leaders. And I think that challenges the top-down versus bottom-up leadership structure. And what I also mean by that is the traditional way a federal organization is organized to do certain things. So I think that would be definitely contribute to the body of knowledge out there. So, well, that concludes my my oral presentation. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Are you ready for the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, thank you.
All right. So
There we are. I'm sorry. I had to unmute myself for a second. I was talking and didn't realize that my unmute didn't hit. Don, I just have one quick word of caution before I open up the floor. You and I went to great lengths to protect the participants and not identify the agency, and you did that. I know this is your first formal presentation on your study, but in the future, just be careful not identifying FBI. Just stick with federal agency.
Yes.
Because if you look at the demographics and someone looks at a GS-15 who's a female and prior military, they may be able to identify one of the participants. So I just want you to be careful and keep that in mind. So
okay.
Now I'll open up the floor to our esteemed committee.
Thank you.
Dr. Hill, if you could go first with your questions, and then we'll follow with Dr. Bottomley, and then I'll go next.
Thank you so much. Don, great job on your oral defense, and what an interesting study. I do like an appreciative inquiry myself, because I like how it focuses on the positives and not the negatives, as you were stating. I'm curious, you mentioned something about your leaders. What do you think your leaders do you think they'll do anything with the information that you got from this research study? And what do you think they'll do with it?
Well, I had made obviously a couple suggestions. It was just passed up to leadership, actually within the past 48 hours, and I've got comments that saying I've read a few pages. This is very interesting. I'd like to have a further discussion with it about it. But I think that more than anything, more than anything, even if my executive management above me doesn't do anything with this, it's allowed me to look at things through a different lens and challenge how an organization is structured to meet its mission and how it can evolve using technology. You know, we've in the past 40, I mean, it would have taken us probably about 40 years to catapult ourselves or to move into the phase that we're going right now. And I mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. It's moving exponentially, and we're adapting to technology. We're expected to adapt to technology exponentially, and look at what's happening in the schools and things like that. Now, as far as my executive management, I know they've looked at it. I will be there to be a proponent for any suggestions they have, and I will probably, as I mentioned before, I will probably delve back into the data that I have and see what other conclusions that I can provide executive management in order to implement the technology to become better leaders using the technology, because that's really where we're heading right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Hill, any additional questions?
Not at this time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bottomley, please.
Yeah, I have 3 or 4 questions, and so I don't know if you want me to just ask one, and then you ask questions, or if you want me to ask all of my questions, not all at once, but ask all of my questions before you start asking yours, or?
Yeah, I think I'll give you the floor, and when you're completed,
All right.
just so I don't repeat any of your questions, I'll give you the opportunity first.
All right. So Don, when discussing with management your results, as you talked about, how are you going to protect your participants?
There is nothing that I'm going to discuss further than what's provided in the document. That has been my mantra throughout this whole period, has been to do the data analysis in a far region and make sure that I have separated church and state from anybody being identified or anything like that. And I appreciate Dr. Ramos's comment about that. I had opened this up as a, oral defense, and I had not even considered the FBI being mentioned in this. But insofar as the participants go, that is privileged information, and I don't even, other than the only way I would be able to know who a participant is at this point is if I listened to a recording, but they're all coded, and I would have to go that far in order to listen to one, and that is in my safe at home, and I have the only copy. Does that answer the question, Dr. Hill?
I believe Dr. Bottomley asked that.
I'm sorry, Dr. Bottomley.
I know our voices sound so similar.
No.
Well, Dr. Hill and I have worked together so long, I figured that she would know what I was looking for.
I apologize.
Oh, no, no apologies needed, Don.
So why appreciative inquiry? Why was that appropriate for this study?
I think given the well, I had identified it before COVID-19, but I think it became more appropriate during COVID-19. I think the appreciative inquiry combined with a semi-structured interview in this particular case, I was looking at the people's emotions, and I wanted to get in touch with how they felt about whether or not they were being led or managed. And I didn't think that there was really, I didn't feel that there was a way to get at those human emotions without having a one-on-one conversation with them. Now, I also felt that the appreciative inquiry also fit my style. I tend to I can be a sort of a people person, and at least I like to think so. And I thought that, I really felt that it fit the data that I was trying to acquire, and it fit my own persona as the instrument to gather that data.
So that leads me to my next question. Your personal style, your persona in gathering the data, how did you control for your own bias in the coding and the interview process and all of that?
Well, I tried to be, I didn't try. When I went through the coding process, I actually took straight from the interview. I didn't modify the statements whatsoever. It was pretty simple to go through the coding process insofar as it was complicated. It was very time consuming, but it was easy to categorize them in the 1, 2, and 3 based on what the statements were. Now, going back to the interview itself, I had asked every one of the individuals at the end of the interview if they felt that I had led them in any way, and if I had, influenced, or we just had a conversation, and every single one of them had said that, no, I think this was very good. You let me talk, you let me express myself, you let me explain the way I thought, the way I felt about the particular situation. So coming out of each interview, I got better and better, I think, at doing it, and I felt that going through all of that really kept my own personal opinions and biases out of this situation. Between member checking and the validity I had on the transcripts themselves, and actually pulling the statements and categorizing those statements, and then leading to my findings, I felt that is about as sterile as I could get with regard to the data and analysis.
Well, sometimes we're unaware of our own biases, and
absolutely.
So although somebody may have said something, it's also in the way that we interpret the meaning of what they've said, whether that be verbal or nonverbal communication. So
absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
And I mentioned that as a limitation, actually, in this appreciative inquiry, because that what I probably could have added to this was a work group of some sort, but I felt that having done the member checking and validating the statements in my field notes by each individual, I didn't think that I didn't, and my recommendations based on those were connected directly to the statements that individuals had. I took them for verbatim. I didn't take them for my own thoughts and ideas, even though, yes, my lens of interpretation, as I mentioned, could have been a limitation in this particular study, and it can be in any qualitative interpretation or any qualitative study.
Okay, Dr. Ramos, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bond, for your contribution. Don, before I ask my questions, I want to give you credit for your topic. Obviously, when you started this, you had no idea that we were going to be in the middle of a pandemic. And I give you credit for adding that relevance to the COVID-19. And also, because you hadn't in the program so well, you've been very diligent and making sure that your references, adjusting them along the way and checking for current references as well. So my first question in the defense portion is, I know you talked about sharing some of the, but what do you feel is the most important contribution that can make to your profession or to society as a whole?
Can you repeat that question? Because you're kind of coming in broken a little bit, Dr. Ramos.
Okay, my question is, what is the most important contribution your study can make to your profession or to society?
That's a very good question. I think that, as I mentioned before, we're in the, we're in the fourth industrial movement, and we are moving, insofar as the federal government is concerned, we're moving much faster than the federal government's ever been comfortable with. And I think that this study on e-leadership versus management, not only is it an eye-opener, I think, and that was one of the comments that I'd forgotten about that I got back from my executive management here, was that, wow, I didn't realize that, the folks in the organization had that interpretation. But I think that in any organization, the sensitivities that we need to exercise with regard to human emotion and how we're conveying relationships through technology, I think is very important. And I think this contributes to that delta that I mentioned earlier about the lack of study that is out there on e-leading. Now, interesting thing that came up a couple times during some of the discussions was that some folks that were in management positions even felt that e-leadership really wasn't a theory, but more so that communication technology is just another tool that a leader levies to exercise leadership, which I thought was a different way of looking at it. But anyway, I think that my contribution is, to that leadership theory, and I think that organizations, particularly this organization, can benefit from some of the suggestions or recommendations based on the results that I got.
Thank you. And I have to admit that while we're building and reviewing your study, I had a point of critical reflection of my own. Being in the state police, and I have 300 members that I supervise. They're spaced out in communications at 5 different dispatch centers across the state. And that really made me think about, because I can't physically be at 5 places at once, at times, am I leading or am I managing, and what resources can I use to be a better leader? So your study has had some critical reflection for myself as well.
Thank you.
So my final question, you're welcome. My chair told me that the best dissertation is a completed one. However, she did encourage me not to just place this study on a shelf after all this great work is completed.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the question portion of it. What is your next research project, and what do you anticipate doing with your current study in the form of contributing either through presentations or publishing?
Well, actually, I'd like to, as they say, best dissertation is one that's complete the doctoral program. But I think that the amount of data that I have and the information that I have, I'd like to comb through it more and see what else I can uncover. My next project actually is a study that I think I'm going to do bureau-wide, actually leveraging the field offices and stuff to determine how the field admins that we have out there supporting forensic investigations, how they're supporting, how they're using technology to support those investigations. So it's a developing concept. We're looking at it right now. I think I'm looking at more of a quantitative than qualitative because we're thinking about using SurveyMonkey, and we're gathering some of our information right now. But I think that's the next sort of project, I guess, that I'm looking at outside of what I do from 9 to 5. I think it's, you know, it's funny you mentioned that reflection, and I had an epiphany. I think it was on Friday, and I've been in this program for a long time, and I always aspire to be a better leader, a scholar, a follower, but you know, really focused on harnessing my leadership skills. And I find it kind of funny that after all this time, I had been aspiring to get my doctorate in organizational management. And it was kind of strange as I had thought about that. It's like, wow, that's interesting. But anyway, kind of digress.
That is an interesting title because we are aspiring to be better leaders. I just want to ask the committee if there's any follow-up questions, anything that our doctoral candidate has replied to. Dr. Hill?
No, sir. Thank you, though.
Dr. Bottomley, any final questions?
I do not have any final questions for the defense. I will have some comments after our discussion to give to Don, but that will wait.
Thank you. And Don, we're about to begin our deliberation, so I ask that you stop the recording.
Okay.
And acknowledge that once the recording has been stopped. And I'm going to ask you to walk away, walk out of the room, and I will text you when our deliberation is completed and invite you back for our closing remarks.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Stop recording.